Hello, this is Greg Allison, Green Greg's, coming to you tonight with special guest Command Sergeant Major Michael Mabee. We've had him on this channel many, many times. He's a good friend of the channel and the Power Grid Defense Movement. Michael Mabee is huge involved in Freedom of Information Acts, trying to get information on what has been going on with attacks on our power grid. He's been doing this for a little time, so he's got quite the background on it. He's got the statistics on it, and it even landed him on 60 Minutes. So we have a major star here in our midst tonight. And I must add one other thing. I consider him a hero in many regards, not only for what he does to the power grid defense, but he was actually at the complex there in New York, the World Trade Center complex. And he rushed a guy that couldn't walk outside of, which tower was it, Mike?
Oh, we were in building 6, and which was Tower 1 fell on, the North Tower fell on building 6. Out of the 7 buildings of the World Trade Center, all were destroyed.
And you got this guy out just before that tower hit, that tower fell. And you know, Mike saved this guy's life, but Mike credits this guy for saving his life because this guy, he ran him out of the building. So this is the kind of hero he is. This is the real kind of guy here. I have a lot of appreciation for Mike Mabee. Not only that, he was in the military. He was a command sergeant major, and you don't get there by twiddling your thumbs, my friends. This guy is a powerhouse, and he's on our side, so we got to be thankful for that. So, Mike, tell us about what you're finding in the realm of attacks on our grid.
Okay. Well, suddenly, as we all noticed, the media got off of the Kardashians in the last couple of weeks, and they've been talking about physical threats to the electric grid. There were a couple of attacks, simultaneous attacks in North Carolina against the electric grid with rifle fire. Took out some transformers, I believe, around 40,000 people put out of power in December. Not good. And then we also heard about attacks in Oregon and Washington State, physical attacks against the grid. Well, this is nothing new. This isn't a new phenomenon. This has been going on for decades. In fact, the first federal report I was able to find about this is a report from May of 1981, 41 years ago, about the physical security or the lack of physical security of U.S. electric grids. That's 40 years ago. We were warned by GAO about physical threats to the electric grid. So now fast forward to today as we're talking, as far as I know, I've been one of the only people kind of tracking for the public the electric disturbance events data and trying to put it into a understandable format. The raw data that comes from the Department of Energy is just these crazy spreadsheets that, you know, you're going to look at that and, well, what is this trying to tell me? So I don't know if you can throw up that all NERC regions chart, that small one, the total one.
I will open that up. Hang on.
Yeah. Well, you're throwing that up, I'll kind of paint the picture. So
my mouse is right on there right now, and she's sticking. Hang on a minute.
Okay.
Be careful. I almost hit the stop record button. She's hanging up on me. All right, here we go. Share screen.
Okay.
There it is. There it is.
All
all regions. You see it?
Yep. There it is. Yep. So what happens is when there's a electric disturbance event, which can be caused by numerous things, and we'll talk about some of them here in a minute. The electric utilities are required to file with the Department of Energy a electric disturbance report form known as an OE-417. And DOE collects this data, and they up on their website a couple times a year, they update it. And I've been pulling that down. And so I've been looking at events from January of 2010 up through the present. And by the present, I'm talking about August 31st of 2022, because DOE does not update their data as often as I would like. I've given them a hard time about that, but they're still only updating it every couple months. So now what this data tells us is that there have been 919 physical attacks against the electric grid since 2010. 919 physical attacks. So now probably most people listening, unless you've been where Greg and I have been talking about this in the past, most people listening are like, well, I never heard that there's been almost 1,000 physical attacks against the electric grid in the last decade. No, you certainly haven't heard this. The only time we end up hearing about these things is when there's something spectacular. So for example, some of us have heard about the attack against the Metcalf transformer station in 2013. And that was a well-coordinated attack with multiple assailants against a transformer substation in Silicon Valley. And in that attack, the assailants climbed into a manhole, cut the alarm wires and the communication wires, exited, and then with precisely aimed rifle fire from pre-established positions, they took the entire substation offline. They knew exactly what they were doing. It's a huge substation with multiple transformers. I believe there was like 24 transformers in the substation. And they took out the majority of them with rifle fire. And then about 1 minute before the police arrived, they disappeared, never to be seen again. And to this day, we don't know who perpetrated that attack against the Metcalf transformer. Now, as a result, one of the results of that is almost immediately the chairman of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC, which is a very small federal agency, flew out there along with some special ops types to take a look at what had happened. And they concluded that this was a coordinated, well-planned attack by people who knew what they were doing and who subsequently were never caught. So FERC commissioned a study at this time. So now we're talking about 2013 timeframe, commissioned a study. And what they found was that taking out a very small number of substations, you can black out the entire US electric grid. And for anybody who's listening to this saying, who the hell is this guy? What is this guy talking about? This is crazy. This can't be true. You need to watch the 60-minute segment that Greg was talking about, where former FERC chairman John Wellinghoff talks about this. So if you Google 60 minutes electric grid, you'll find it. Or if you go up on my website, gridsecuritynow.org, you'll find it right on my homepage. You'll see the 60 minutes link. Just click on it. But you need to watch that. And not only that, you need to show it to everybody in your family, and you need to show it to all of your friends, because we have a serious threat to the electric grid right now. And we just saw in North Carolina that in a coordinated attack on 2 substations that blacked out tens of thousands of people. And then we had some other attacks. So far, no arrests have been made. I hope they do. I really hope they're able to figure out who did this and arrest them. But Metcalf, they never figured out who did it. So let's go back a little bit and talk about what is the electric grid. Because everybody's heard that term, but a lot of people don't really understand what that means. So the electric grid is actually over 3,000 different companies, both public and private sector companies, involved in the generation, transmission, and distribution of electric power. So those 3,000 companies are actually operating in a self-regulatory environment. So there is no government agency that has the authority to tell the electric grid to protect itself from any particular threats: physical threat, cyber threat, threat of a geomagnetic disturbance or solar flare, threat of extreme weather, threat of an electromagnetic pulse attack. Those are kind of, in my mind, the big 5 threats. There are other threats, the electric grid, but those are kind of the big 5 that worry me the most. And the federal government nor the state governments have the authority to order the electric grid to protect itself against these threats. So we're in this self-regulatory environment with our most critical infrastructure. So everybody's heard the term critical infrastructure. So let's talk about what that means really quick. So in the United States, we've got about 320 million people. Okay. Everything that we need to keep a population of 320 million people alive is wholly dependent on the electric grid. The electric grid is our life support system. It is our respirator. Without that, we die. If somebody unplugs the electric grid, we die. We die by the tens of thousands, by the hundreds of thousands, by the millions, because everything we need to survive is wholly dependent on the electric grid. For example, food. All of the food in the grocery store, and your local grocery store only has enough food for about 2 days. They've got a just-in-time distribution system. So, when you pull off a can of green beans off the shelf, their inventory computers order a new can of green beans, and that's how they keep it stocked. All of that depends on electricity. The transportation system to bring the food to the grocery store depends on electricity. Everything having to do with food production depends on electricicity. Our farms need electricity to pump the diesel fuel for the tractors.
That's
so
why transportation needs it too. To move it to the grocery stores, you have to pump fuel, you have to pump water, and all the computers and cash registers and lights and refrigerators, and all that needs electricity.
Right, and so food is another. So we have 16 critical infrastructures. One of them is food. One of them is water and wastewater systems. So after the Texas blackout in 2021, what we saw is millions of people in Texas lose their water or be given boil water orders because the water was no longer safe. We saw fire departments unable to put out fires because they had no water to put out fires. So the water was dependent on the electric grid. Sewer systems are dependent on the electric grid. So no electricity, you've got no food, you've got no water, you've got no sewer, you've got no communications. Your medical system breaks down. For those of you who remember Hurricane Katrina, look at what happened to the medical system in New Orleans from the loss of electric power from Hurricane Katrina. Look at what happened in Puerto Rico with Hurricane Maria. So the whole medical system, the chemical sector, the nuclear sector. Imagine that. We've got 99 nuclear power plants in the United States operating nuclear reactors, not counting the decommissioned ones, which still need electricity to keep the spent fuel rods immersed in water. Without electricity, your decommissioned nuclear plants are not safe either. So I came from New England, and we had several decommissioned nuclear plants. They still require electricity. Otherwise, you've got a Fukushima. So you think about this. Electricity goes on. I know, Greg, you live near one too, don't you?
So Ralph's Ferry is 26 miles in about that direction, a little bit too close, and it's been running for decades and has one of the largest storage places for those spent fuel rods, which is all get out. And for several years, they have to be actively cooled in water. The water pools evaporate about 160 gallons of water a minute. You have to pump that water in. The grid goes down. They got backup generators. Those backup generators require diesel fuel, which has to be shipped in, has to be pumped. The trucks won't be there delivering. If you had some alternate means to get the fuel to the trucks, these trucks don't run long without spare parts, and the supply chain, those things break down. I mean, there's so many things and pieces that just start to unravel without.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, in Texas with that blackout, so it was literally a 2-day blackout. And the gas stations in Texas had no gas, even with on. Grocery store shelves were empty. Gas stations had no gas. It took quite a while for the transportation infrastructure to catch up. So, the electric grid goes down, no food, no water, no sewer, no medical system, no communications, nuclear power plants melt down. All 16 of the critical infrastructures in the United States depend on the electric grid. So the electric grid is literally the Achilles heel of the United States. Now, there's somebody listening right now that's saying, why is he saying this? People are going to find out about it. Well, my friends, the only people who don't know about it are the American citizens. Trust me. The North Koreans know about it. The Russians know about it. The Chinese know about it. The Iranians know about it. Every terrorist organization, domestic and foreign, know about it. The only people who don't know about it are the American people. And the American people are the only ones who can solve this debacle by holding our government accountable to protect the electric grid. And that's the piece that we're missing right now. We've got all of these threats that have not been addressed that we've known about for decades. So we talked a little bit about the physical threat. And by the way, I mean, a lot of times people ask me, well, what's the biggest threat to the electric grid? And my answer is all of them. However, probably the one that keeps me up the most at night is the physical threat. And I'll tell you why. If you think about 9/11 and the sophistication that attack took to have multiple hijackings at multiple airports, to hijack several planes and run them into buildings, all pretty much during the same time frame without anybody knowing about it, that's a pretty high level of sophistication. And plus, these people had to at least learn enough about how to fly an airplane to be able to pull this attack off. A physical attack against the electric grid is low. It does not take a great degree of sophistication. And a coordinated physical attack against the electric grid is something that worries me greatly. Now, one of the things that worries me is the fact that nobody in the electric grid has been preparing for multiple coordinated attacks. Well, how can I say that? Okay, because after the Metcalf attack that we talked about in 2013, that scared some people. It scared some people in Congress and it scared some people in the government because it looks like it could have been a dry run for a terrorist attack, and we don't know who did it. Whether it was, whoever it was that did it, they knew what they were doing. It was well planned, well executed. They didn't get caught. So that was scary. So there were hearings, and in the hearings, the government was saying, well, we need to have a mandatory physical security standard for the electric grid. And the electric utility industry fought against that. They didn't want to do it. They didn't want to have a mandatory physical security standard. But finally, the federal government, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, as I said, the government doesn't have the authority to order the grid to protect itself against any threat. But what the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission does have the authority to do is direct a nonprofit organization which functions as the grid's self-regulator, and that's the North American Electric Reliability Corporation. They're a not-for-profit, private corporation, and just like Wall Street with FINRA and the exchanges, which are not government entities, they're private regulators, private sector regulators. It's the same with the electric grid, with at least part of the electric grid. Remember, I said the electric grid is generation, transmission, and distribution of electric power. So the transmission part, the federal government has a little bit of authority. And its authority is it can order NERC, the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, to write a standard. Okay, what does that mean? Who is NERC? Well, NERC is funded by the utilities that it regulates. That's where it gets its money. And it is run by the utilities it regulates. It's a classic fox guarding the hen house. So the way NERC is set up in its bylaws, the regulated utilities have the vast majority of the votes for the NERC board of directors, which makes the decisions. So when the federal government ordered NERC to write a physical security standard, who wrote the physical security standard? The electric utility industry. They wrote it. And there was a lot of drama. The way they wrote it, it was pretty clear that almost every facility would not be covered by the physical security standard. And there was one word in there that was used numerous times, and it was widespread. So the only time that a facility would fall under the physical security standard is if the loss of that facility would cause a widespread power outage, right? So the government made them remove the word widespread. But the utility industry still wrote the standard in such a way that it exempts all generation facilities, and it exempts almost every single facility in the long distance transmission system. So very few facilities are even covered by the standard. And then moreover, what does the standard require that they do? The standard requires that they have a notebook that says physical security on it sitting up on their shelf. That's literally all the standard requires. It doesn't require that anybody with physical security knowledge review their alleged physical security plan, or that the physical security plan be effective in any way. So the standard itself is a paper tiger. It's was written by the industry because the industry didn't want it written in the first place. We shouldn't be surprised. I mean, they told Congress, no, we don't think we need one. The government made them write it anyway. So we shouldn't be surprised that the physical security standard is complete Bravo Sierra. We really should not be surprised at all. But that's what it is. This notebook is what's standing between us and our families dying of waterborne diseases, starvation, and societal collapse. So that's got to be fixed. And again, who's going to fix that? The only people who are going to fix that are us, is the American people holding your politicians accountable. So that's just one of the threats. You know, then you started talking about cyber, GMD, EMP, extreme weather, anything like that. But let me shut up and Greg, let you ask me some questions, because I'll just go on and on. You know me.
Well, you going on and on is pretty good, because you're a fountain of knowledge there, Mike, because you live this stuff. You're in and out of it all day long, every day. And you've done a lot for our cause here. And indeed, it's going to take the people. And here's one thing that, you talked about NERC. You talked about the incestuous relationship of NERC itself, how it's comprised of the industry. What you didn't mention is we have a Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which actually is required to get all their regulations from NERC, and basically they rubber stamp what NERC writes in the first place. So NERC and FERC have a very, you could say, incestuous relationship between each other. And there's also revolving doors between federal regulators and corporate regulatees. The door revolves. So nobody on the federal side wants to get the people that are supposed to be regulating upset, because that's where the money is. They want to retire and go over there and make twice the salary. And sometimes people on the industry side, especially the younger managers, they want to spend a little time on the federal side, because that gives them, a big ticket going back in the industry and getting a much higher paying job. So it's a very incestuous relationship, much more so than you normally get between federal regulators and federal regulatees. And this whole regulator-regulatee relationship needs to be busted across the entire spectrum of the federal government. It's all just takes our money and doesn't give us anything back in return for it. And this one is a special case. It's like triple incest. It's awful. It's terrible.
It is. It's actually this regulatory debacle, or this regulatory boondoggle, I like to call it, has actually caused the loss of life in the United States. So let me give you another example of where this regulatory system failed and then nothing was done about it when scores of people died. So in 2003, there was the Great Northeast Blackout of 2003. So 55, it was 55 million people out of power, 45 in the United States, 10 in Canada. And literally it was caused by untrimmed foliage in Ohio contacting some transmission lines, which caused a series of events, human error, computer error, that ended up cascading into a blackout of the entire eastern seaboard and part of Canada, just from this tree branch in Ohio. So after that blackout, everybody's freaking out. There's congressional hearings, how could this happen and how can we prevent it? So it was decided again against the electric utility industry's advice. The government decided we need to have a tree trimming standard. So they ordered the self-regulator Nuke to do a tree trimming standard, or they call it transmission vegetation management is the name of it, but a tree trimming standard. So it took 10 years. So it was 2003, the Great Northeast Blackout of 2003. The standard didn't get approved till 2013. Was the standard effective? Well, let's ask the people of Paradise, California, where PG&E killed 84 people through transmission vegetation management violations. Okay, so PG&E is now a convicted felon, 84 felony manslaughter, convictions that they pled guilty to, along with some other stuff. But PG&E is not the only company in the electric utility industry with a little bit of a checkered past. We had a whole huge scandal in Ohio and Illinois with First Energy bribing public officials. I don't even need to start talking about Enron, but we're talking about an industry that's got a very checkered past to begin with. And then we're talking about an industry that in the last 10 years has spent $1.5 billion lobbying the federal government to keep regulation at bay.
For the last 10 years, they spent $1.5 billion. Now, that's in the realm and order of magnitude of what Dr. Pry used to teach us that we could use to do a first order hardening grid. So what you're telling us is that the utility industry has used ratepayer money to lobby against making ratepayers safe, that they could have taken the same money instead of lobbying against making the system safe. They could have fixed the system for the most part, at least the first order. And what happened? A bunch of lawyers up on K Street in Washington, D.C. got fat pockets. I know what K Street looks like. I've been there. And so, that's all. It happens to be one of the most developed streets in Washington, D.C. because them lawyers are high power to make a lot of money running the halls of Congress. So they took all that money and put it in their pocket where it could have been out here in the grid doing us all a service, making us all safer. But no. And those lawyers, they probably got a very sweet relationship with all that corporate management. So they got a real good huggy relationship, kind of like that other relationship we just mentioned. Words I don't really like using on this channel. But anyway, we know what we're talking about here. It's nasty. It's nasty. And but we need to really push against the shame on them. $1.5 billion over 10 years. And, they were doing this before then, too. So, but now a lot of us are out here trying to push to get the grid fixed. Those guys have got real active. And every time we think we're getting somewhere, they try to find an end run around us to thwart our best efforts to get the grid taken care of.
Yep. And let me point out a couple of other things that I think people really need to know. And Greg just mentioned this a second ago, but I think we really need to punctuate this point. If you pay an electric bill, you are paying for lobbyists to lobby against grid security. So you are actually, when you pay your electric bill, you're paying an army of attorneys and lobbyists to endanger your family. Can you imagine that? But that's exactly what's happening here. Another point that I think is worthy of mention, and especially, we're in a very, very polarized time in our history. As a matter of fact, I can't think of any time that, things have been more polarized since probably the Civil War. But this is a bipartisan failure. As I said, we've known for decades. We've known since at least 1981 about the physical threat. We've known since at least 2003 that the Chinese were in the electric grid in cyber attacks. We've known since 1989 about the threat of geomagnetic disturbance. And we've known since the 1970s about the threat of electromagnetic pulse to the grid. And every single year, we're seeing the threat of extreme weather. So it's not as if, the government hasn't known about this. So why haven't they fixed it? And whose fault is it? Well, I can tell you right now, after studying this for over a decade, it's a failure of administrations, both blue and red, Congresses, both blue and red. You can't blame the Democrats or the Republicans. You got to blame all of them. And just to give you an example, in 2020, the top recipients of electric utility industry money in Congress, I'll just give you the first two, okay? Bernie Sanders got $340,000, and David Perdue, Republican from Georgia, got $295,000. And when you look at it, when you look at the money, and if you go up on my website, I've got kind of a chart of, all the people in Congress and how much money they took. And you can look at it, and what you see is, independent, Republican, Democrat, Republican, Democrat, Republican. It's evenly spread. It's not one party or the other is not doing their job. None of them are doing their job. And the only thing that we can do to fix it is we need to demand that our elected officials, and it doesn't matter whether you voted for them or not, they're your representative. They need to represent your interests. And honestly, I have engaged people that I didn't vote for, and they earned my vote for the next election because they took action. And there's other people that I did vote for that wouldn't return my calls. Their staff wouldn't return my calls. Guess what? When I went in the voting booth, I found somebody else to vote for next election. That's the way I roll. Is my family's safety is my number one issue, my number one priority, and the country's protecting the country is a close number two. So if you want my vote, then you're going to take action, and if you don't, then I'll vote for somebody else.
I might add to that, there's a testament to how good that number two is. If anybody looks on that bookshelf behind you, it's lined with helmets and hats you've worn in the military. So there's the testament. You've been at the front line, the tip of the spear of protecting this country. So when you say it's a close number two, that means just way out there that you're in the forefront of that effort. So, and of course, you want to protect your family first. I also see that the Army folder up there opened up that you've got some kind of award, accomplishment award in that. I don't know what that is, but I've had a few of those. So I know what that is. At least I know you got an award in that big green folder there. So yeah, it's pretty obvious that you like I said, you didn't get to be a command sergeant major by twiddling your thumbs.
No, but I will admit, Greg, that award is one I got for running the wrong way.
Oh.
On 9/11, I ran the wrong way. That's why I got that one. So, but what can how are we going to fix this? We don't want to all die, or we don't want hundreds of thousands of Americans to die of waterborne diseases because the grid went down and we're drinking unsafe water, and the sewer systems are down and we're starving, so we don't have food. So what do we do about this? Well, what we do about this is you got to figure out who your elected officials are. So everybody listening to me, you've got a representative in the House of Representatives, federal, and you've got 2 senators. You've also got state representatives. And you need to call them and, request a meeting with somebody from their staff, their energy. Most of the people in Congress have somebody that handles energy issues. So that's the person you want to talk to. Yeah, it's probably not likely that if you live in Texas, you're going to get a meeting with Ted Cruz, but get a hold of this.
You might. You never might.
But whoever it is. But my litmus test is: am I getting somebody that I can talk to, that I can raise these issues with, who's going to bubble it up to their boss, and is something going to happen? And I've had several examples where I have been able to get legislators to take action, and I've got many examples of not being able to get my calls returned. Yeah. But unless we all start holding our government accountable to protect the electric grid, it's just not going to happen on its own. The only other way it's going to happen is if tens of thousands of people die. That's the way our government reacts. They don't see a threat and fix it. They only react when something bad happens, is what it seems to be. So I don't like Plan B. Plan A is that we engage our government and hold them accountable for protecting the electric grid. I don't want to wait around for Plan B where something horrible happens and they take action because of that. And as we've seen in the past, even when that happens, even after the Great Northeast Blackout of 2003, even after Metcalf, the government's response was flaccid, was just unacceptable. It didn't fix the problem.
So I've heard that that NERC or officials came out and said they had it all fixed. This wasn't going to happen again. And somebody went right back to the same facility like a week later and went into it again.
Yeah. Well, and like they said, oh, the Texas grid's fixed. No, the Texas grid's not fixed. During that cold snap, our power went out for several hours and I wasn't home. My family had to deal with this alone because whatever the governor of Texas claims it was fixed, it was not fixed. So, luckily, we're, I think most people in your audience are probably on the better prepared side of the house compared to most Americans, so, we were ready for blackouts, but, in 2021 in the Texas blackout, 250 people died when the grid went down. They died of hypothermia. They died of carbon monoxide poisoning. They died of the failure of their home medical equipment, all things directly related to the loss of the electric grid. So, it's unacceptable that our grid is threatened by so many things that could be easily fixed. And
it could be easily fixed, and they just fight against us every way we turn.
Yep.
You can have a fate. Oh, yeah, by the way, let me show this. Mike, you might recognize this book. You ever seen this before?
I think I read it.
Yeah. Name's at the bottom. Mike wrote the book, Civil Defense. In fact, it is titled The Civil Defense Book. So Mike knows what he's talking about in this category. Even signed this one for me. So Mike has actually been a speaker at my power grid defense conferences. And Mike is a great guy to hang with. He's got a lot of good war stories and just full of energy and enthusiasm to make things better in this country. And part of that, he's talked about contacting the fact you can do things. I have done the same myself. I've led, back when I was promoting space development, groups of just regular housewives and just citizens into the halls of Congress myself. That's why I know what K Street looks like, and I run the halls of Congress. And I wrote an article about some of that here in the magazine of Ad Astra, the magazine of the National Space Society, back when I was chairman of the policy committee. And I always kind of wax poetic. This is concerning constellations, cancellation, Congress, and camels. Well, that's the Anglo-Saxon way to be poetic, or old Nordic, alliteration. But this I wrote back in 2010. And yeah, well, I had a big impact on space legislation and the architecture of the space systems that we have today just by doing that. People can have a lot more impact than they think. You just got to be out there and do it. And I'm going to show y'all a couple of websites here, guys. I'm going to do a share again. And one of them is my Freedom Restoration Foundation.org, which I've set this website up myself for our organization, Freedom Restoration Foundation. And if you come in here, this is the home page. Goes in a lot of what we're about here, that, taking action in national, local levels, personal things you can do. Now, this stands for, this could apply to the power grid or anything you want to take action on. But we got an action center here. You click the action center. It's chock full of various alerts that we're running on various things. If you click on a lot of this is political stuff, but you get a lot of background detail on some of these things. But the coolest thing is, if you come down and scroll down past all this, there's a litany of what to do and how to do it. Make your voice count, the basics. This talks about here's national tracking bills for the U.S. government, track Congress. Track your state bills in your state. The states are very important for grid defense. State legislator websites, how to find out who your Congress representative is, how to find out who your senator is. And it tells you here's a switchboard number you can call in Washington, D.C. 202-224-3121. You can almost remember that, guys. 202, that's the number for D.C. 224-3121. You can press 1 for Senate and 2 for the House. Now, if you get a staffer, that's still a good thing, because it's the staffers that does the work. They're the ones that formulate the policy and typically take it up to their Congress critter, to the senator, and make things happen. So getting them, you need to get them on board anyway. I mean, you might get straight to your direct representative. That happens from time to time. I've met both, and I will say that I've had good impact both ways. I've had a very good impact dealing with the staffers. In fact, the biggest impact I probably had was when I went to Colonel Paul Damphus for Senator Bill Nelson, where we had a huge impact on space policy in the United States then. But this goes into a lot of stuff here, and this is a recap of these sites. And then there's another website that you might take great interest in. I want everybody to go to this website that I'm about to show you right. If I get my cursor over, my cursor is like stuck or something. What's wrong with this thing? Maybe my table's too slick or something. There we go. Go to this website right here. You recognize that one, Mike?
Oh, yeah.
Grid Security Now. This is Mike's website. And he gives you a little background about himself. There he is as a young lad. And, and as you might know, like I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of resources on here. If you look down this right-hand side, there's a lot of articles and things you can click on, including 60 Minutes. So you definitely want to go in and check some of this. Like I said, Mike is a star now. He's been on 60 Minutes covering grid defense, the things that we need to know. And there's just a lot of material on this website, guys. This is an education in grid defense right here, full-blown education. And he's got some, I think, other tabs or something. Yeah, you can go up here and get the library, grid security library, civil defense library. The cavalry is not coming. I put that in a view graph years ago, the pitch more part of defense. Yeah, you are the cavalry, my friends. You can't be counting on somebody else to come rescue you like a lot of people think. Fund the fight, take action. There's more stuff about Mike and his book. You should get his book, Take Action. So there you go. America needs you to secure the grid. And there's just tons of things in here you can do. Meet your representatives and senators and hand them letters. See, guys, direct calls for things you can do. Oh, hey, this looks familiar. Who's this guy? Green Greggs. There we go. So, and here's Tommy Waller. You and I, Tommy, had a few good times having some dinner together at the conference I ran. So Tommy's a powerhouse, very dedicated Marine he is. He's a colonel, by the way. So we've got a lot of people here that are committed to trying to get the grid hardened, but the industry is fighting us. And this is why we need to take it to the public, because we're a small group of guys. We need the public speaking and contacting the Congress critters and say, hey, guys, we got to get something done. And right here is the what to do's.
Right.
What to do. So there's a lot of people come on YouTube and they complain about problems. Oh, woe is me. We got this problem. We got that problem. Put your head in the sand, you know, or buy beans and rice. Well, you probably do need beans and rice. And you need to grow a garden. And Mike grows a garden, by the way, as I do. So we believe in it. Let me stop this share here. But
yep,
we're going above and beyond that. We're working to try to stop the problem. An ounce of prevention is worth a gallon of cure. We may still have other problems coming at us, but if we work together, this might not be one of them.
Right. And another website you probably should throw up, Greg, is the griddownpowerup.com.
Oh, yeah. Grid Down Power. That's the one with Tice, right?
Yeah. Yes, exactly. You know, a lot of people might be like, well, you know, I don't know all the facts. So if I get a hold of my congressman, what am I going to tell him? What am I going to do? Well, on my website, there's all kinds of things you can do. There's reports you can print out, you know, to talk with them about. But another thing you can do is there's a documentary coming out called Grid Down Power Up. And it's narrated by Dennis Quaid, you know, famous actor. And on the Grid Down Power Up website, you can view the trailer right now. And after the premiere, which is just in about 2 weeks in Hollywood, after the premiere, it's going to be available, you know, for distribution. So you'll be able to see the actual, you know, the actual documentary very soon. But for now, the trailer is available and you can watch that.
Yeah, I've had David Tice, the producer,
yep,
on this channel a couple of times.
Right.
There you go. There's a transformer blowing up. That's what you don't want to see, and this is how you might wind up if you're not careful. So
Yep.
this is a very powerful set of videos here, and we got so David in here, he goes into things that you can do, solutions,
Right.
Participate. That's what's good about this site, guys. You come in here and hit, yeah, you can watch that trailer, but he goes into things to do because he's an activist trying to get the problem fixed. And another guy who's produced a video is David. Oh, shoot, help me out.
Womack.
Huh?
Womack.
David
Womack.
Right. He actually cut video at my last conference on this topic. David Womack participated. So there's a couple of good videos out there. This one is more proactive in things you can do. Spread the word, pay it forward, contact the right people, legislators, regulators. Yes, contact regulators, FERC, NERC. Now, our good friend here, Command Sergeant Major Michael Mabee, has been quite involved in this area here with regulators and NERC and FERC.
In fact, I'm suing them to secure the grid. So,
there you go. He is suing to get our grid secured on our behalf, guys. I'm telling you, Mike is a hero. He is a hero. I mean, the heroes don't wear leotards and capes. You find more of them have worn or are wearing maybe fatigues or camo.
Yeah.
Or it might be the mom or pop, mopping the floor, mom or pop with a mop. You can all be heroes. That's the truth. And this is how to do it. This is how you can be a hero.
Yeah. And what Greg said about, like some of the best success I've had with legislators is when I got a hold of somebody in their staff. And, one example, when I was in New Hampshire, I got a hold of my representative through her staff member. I actually went to Washington, met with him, provided a lot of information, and that legislator in turn took action on something that I had going with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, backed me up on it. And, that was very good. A state legislator I actually met with in person. And, a lot of times your state legislators, you might have more luck meeting with them in person. And if the federal government has dropped the ball for so many years, we need to talk with our states about them enacting legislation on the state level to protect the electric grid.
Hey, listen, I had a state senator on my power grid committee right here in Huntsville, Alabama, Tom Butler. Tom Butler was on my power grid defense committee, and he would come to our meetings, and just like the rest of us, he was concerned. And he basically said, "Hey, look, if you can get a bill passed, and if you can get a line item in the transportation bill passed that addresses this, and I can get money appropriated at the state level to make it happen." And somehow the budget got out there, but I've been trying to convince my other power grid guys here to push for that within the state, within the federal infrastructure bills, because then we can get. See, one of the problems is the power grid companies, they'll spend money to keep from spending money, but they'll spend more money to keep them spending money. They would have fixed the problem in the first place. But if we can bring external money into it, they might be more inclined to get the job done correctly.
And that's exactly what my point has been. And, Greg, you said it too, on the lobbying. Instead of spending all this money fighting against grid security, why don't we use that money for grid security? And it's important to know if the people that are representing you in Congress are getting money in contributions, campaign contributions from the electric utility industry. We've had several bills before Congress that never made it out of committee that would have afforded protections to the electric grid. Well, why didn't they make it out of committee? Because it's awfully hard to support a bill that your big donors don't want supported. And the big donor isn't Mike Mabee or Greg Allison, it's the electric utility industry. They don't even notice our $20 check, but they notice the tens of thousands and the millions of dollars that the electric utility industry spends on campaign contributions.
But if suddenly there's a chorus of calls from the community saying, "Hey, look, this needs to be done," they got to listen.
Yes.
Votes. That's what keeps them in office. Even the contributions they're getting from these big donors, they want to turn that into advertisements when they run for office. If suddenly they're getting their electorate saying, "Hey, bull, we don't want that. We want this," and they're getting a lot. If every call they get, they got to assume there's between 10 to 100 people in their electorate that thinks that way. And so this is why we need to push on them, and we need to make our voices heard. And that really can go a long way.
Yeah, absolutely. So, it's a huge problem. It threatens all of us, but it's something that everybody listening to this can do something about. You can get involved. We've got to make, hey, America is the greatest country, democracy. What was it that Churchill said? Democracy is the worst system of government with the exception of all the others, or something like that. But we've got to make this work. We send these people to DC, whether we voted for them or not, they represent you. So don't worry about it if you didn't vote for them. If you voted for the other person, they still have to represent you. And in fact, make them earn your vote. Well, I didn't vote for you last time, but I'll tell you what, if you protect my family, I'll vote for you next time. And if you don't, I'm going to vote for somebody else.
There you go. Don't fiddle while America burns. Don't be a Nero, be a hero, or our grade is going to be a 0. All right, guys, that's it. So basically, we painted the problem. We painted the picture. We've shown there's a background. We've shown that it is intense, that that our grid is being attacked. We know that the frequency is picking up. We know that there are bad actors out there that know this. Everybody knows this but our own people, as Mike said. And we've got to get this word out and be heard and let the power grid and the especially our elected officials know that this has got to be dealt with. And another thing we've got to do is stop buying all these Chinese components to put in our critical infrastructure, because they're not really our best friends at this very moment in time. And there's a lot of questions about some of those components. The previous president had put out an executive order to prohibit that, and the current president rescinded that on day one in office, and that's really shocked a lot of us. So we hope we can get that turned around. But guys, work with us, and we're working to make this a better life, a better future, and hopefully to avert this one thing. That is our goal. But hey, guys, still you can always buy your beans and rice, or go to prepwithgreg.com, and but better yet, garden. It's good for you. You get better stuff, and there's other challenges ahead of us. Mike's gardening. He used to garden. He used to do aquaponics in his basement up in the Northeast. Now he's growing down in Texas. He's moved to Texas, and he was telling me how he's put a big wire fortress around his garden to keep out big critters. And he's telling me that's on
critter cat.
So if Mike Mabee sees the fitness in gardening, you ought to see it too. And hey, if you're gardening, you need worms so you can recycle your waste. You won't have to go to the store if the grid goes down. You get everything you need. Go to ringgregs.com, get you some worms, ringgregs.com. But anyway, Mike, I really appreciate you. Like I said, you are one of my personal heroes, because you're out here doing what needs to be done, and everybody listening can become a hero. You don't have to put on leotards or a cape. You can be a hero just like you are. All you got to do is pick up the phone or send an email and just get active. Go watch go to Mike's website. It's an education. There's a lot of stuff there. Go to Grid Down, Power Up. I guess sometimes I get that in reverse, but go there to that website. Yep. I'll put the links in the show notes and the pin notes below this video, so you can find those resources and a lot of other good places to go to get stuff, like Lehman Brothers. If the grid goes down, that's the best place to go go before the grid goes down. Get yourself ready. Prepare in every way you can. But let's try to not take it on the back end of dealing with it after it happens. Let's just go up front and try to prevent it from happening in the first place.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much for having me, Greg.
Mike, it's always a pleasure. You're always great to talk with and to hang with. We've got a good group with our power grid defense community. I've enjoyed many times spending time with you guys. Ken Krosniak, General Krosniak, and guys, it really pains me that we lost Dr. Pry.
Yes.
He was interested in
the thing is, Dr. Pry got many of us into this fight, and his legacy will carry on. You know,
he
he-
lives to what we do.
Yep, and nobody in the government would know what electromagnetic pulse was if it wasn't for Dr. Pry.
Right.
You know,
Right.
and we will just pick up the torch and carry it.
We do him honor by carrying this torch. So let's keep it going. Well, Mike, like I said, I appreciate you very much. Thank you for coming on here, and let's do this again in the not so distant future.
Absolutely.
All right,
and wishes a happy new year to all your subscribers.
Well, thank you, and happy New Year to you and your family, Mike. And with that, I'm going to say to everyone out here, happy New Year to you, and Greg out.